Greetings, Pinkbike. Dario here with the brand new Santa Cruz Vala. Now, the Vala is an all-mountain, do-it-all e-bike with a full power Bosch CX performance motor and battery system. It's got 150 millimeters of rear wheel travel, a 160 millimeter fork, and perhaps most notably, it doesn't have VPP suspension. Now, this is the thing that's probably gonna get the most talking points with the new Vala. It's a big departure for the brand, and according to them, it was done primarily for packaging concerns. With the new Bosch system come some different constraints that they weren't used to working with, and despite trying to package VPP to achieve the kinematic goals they had with the bike, found that it just didn't work as well as they wanted it to. So they went back to the drawing board and came out with this, a 4-bar layout that looks kind of just delightfully normal. It looks like a normal bike, but again, pretty unusual for a Santa Cruz. Along with that 4-bar change come some interesting kinematics that deviate slightly from the brand new Bronson, but in many ways, I would think of this as the electrified Bronson. The geometry is almost identical. Again, those kinematics are quite close. And maybe the rider is pretty similar as well. Someone who's looking for one bike to do a lot of different things, tackle anything from really gnarly trails to your general everyday trail riding, but we'll get into that, pardon me, in the ride impressions. On a higher level, it's a carbon frame with mixed wheels in every single size. Like many Santa Cruz bikes, it's got a C and CC carbon option, and that comes down to the weight of the carbon frame and the quality of the layup. Broad strokes for geometry, we've got a 63.9 degree head tube angle, a 77.2 degree seat tube angle, chain stays that scale with every size in the range, and there are 5 of those sizes. I am on an extra large here with a 495 mil reach, and I find that their stack heights scale quite nicely with each size as well. Like many Santa Cruzes, there is a geometry flip chip in the linkage that allows you to change the bottom bracket height by 4 millimeters and the head and seat tube angles by 0.3 degrees. This bike also features a progression flip chip to change the rate from 26% to 29%, depending on your preferences. And that's about it in terms of adjustment. It's gonna be fixed with the mixed wheel, fixed with most of the geometry, with just some little changes that you can make. One other fixed element to this bike is the battery size. So the new Bosch CX system comes with either a 600 or 800 watt hour battery as an option, but with the Vala, you will only have the 600 watt hour option. So for those of you looking for more power out of the, more battery life out of the system, you're gonna have to use Bosch's Power More battery adapter that bolts to the down tube. Now, the primary reason behind that decision from Santa Cruz came down to the weight. They wanted to keep this bike relatively light and keep the handling a bit more normal feeling, more in line with your typical trail bike. In order to achieve that, they kept the battery small. They've pared down on, all the things that might incur extra weight on this bike. Luckily for them, the new Bosch stuff is quite a bit lighter than the outgoing. They've also done a decent job of getting the weight of the battery low on the bike. It's worth noting that the charging port is below the battery, so that means it does have to bump up a little bit in the down tube from where it could sit. But because it is the smaller battery option, it's lighter weight, not as significant impact on the ride quality. This extra large right here weighs 48 pounds on my scale, and that is with a DH rim and a downhill tire and a 240 mil dropper post and a Fox 38. Some fairly heavy components as well as the motor and battery, but all in all, not too grossly heavy a bike. I'm gonna send it over to my perfect genetic clone who's out on trail on an identical Vala and have him tell you a little bit about the ride impressions.
All right, I am out here on the Vala, getting some hot laps in right before it gets dark. And first thoughts, this bike just handles really nicely. I think having ridden the Bronson quite a bit recently, they feel impressively similar. The way that the geometry handles on trail is definitely in keeping between the two. I think the suspension feels maybe a little bit more active on the Vala, which I think suits the e-bike more, because you have the extra system weight that kind of keeps it planted. So it doesn't matter if that rear wheel is moving more. You can kind of trust that the chassis weight will keep it a bit more settled through travel. I am primarily riding it in the linear setting just because I like the push-in feeling that you get off the top, as opposed to it diving into travel a bit more in the more progressive setting. It's a pretty subtle difference between the two, but for me, so far, linear has been favorable. In terms of the weight and how that impacts handling, you know, this is a pretty light e-bike. It feels like one, feels like an e-bike. I can't say I'm like convinced that it's a trail bike. You know, like you're aware of there being more heft under you, but you know, for me, that's sometimes even a benefit to how an e-bike handles. You can kind of throw it into stuff a bit more and expect that the chassis weight will just settle, carry you, keep things humming along. For the same reason though, I'm a little curious as to why they didn't offer an 800 watt hour version. I know that the down tube thickness was part of that. They didn't want it to get too bloated, but for 30% more battery life, I think I would have taken that. Plus I think it's a kilo different between the two, so I don't know. To me, there's an argument to be made for this bike with a big battery, just because a lot of people are getting e-bikes for the laps. You know, they just want to get as much riding in as possible, and then the ride quality, it's not ancillary, but it is maybe secondary to the fact that you're just like doing what I'm doing, you know, plowing up a fire road, barely out of breath at all, and just getting 2 or 3 times more riding in.
Thank you to Doppelganger Dario out there in the woods. Hope you're having a good time. I'm gonna finish things up here with some thoughts about the Vala and maybe what it means for Santa Cruz as a brand. In my eyes, this is not like the beginning of some bold new era. I think it's a smart implementation of a different suspension design for a specific problem. That said, I do hope that it allows them to start doing some more unusual responses to said problems in the future. I don't know if we'll see trail bike versions, because we just had the High Tower and the Bronson come out with VPP less than a month ago, which indicates to me that they're, one, not leaving VPP behind, and two, probably sticking with that for bikes that they're able to package it with. Again, like the kinematics of this bike are very similar to that Bronson, even though it uses a different layout. You know, I think the ride feel is different because it's an e-bike versus a pedal bike, but having ridden both, I can kind of see, you know, the similarities between the two. They're mid-travel, do-it-all bikes that are gonna appeal to someone who wants one bike to do just about anything. You know, if you're someone who wants to have a pedal bike and an e-bike along the same lines, you could get this in a Bronson and they'd feel, aside from the weight and handling differences, they'd feel pretty similar. I'm curious to see what people think about this. It's a significant thing, but not like earth-shattering. I am curious though, like what do people think about Santa Cruz starting to deviate from VPP? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Have they lost their way? You know, leave a comment, let us know. Be sure to read the full article. There's a lot more information there on pinkbike.com, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.